Thanks for plugging in today. If you're watching this video, this one's going to be really important because we're going to be talking about expectations if you are transitioning out of the military, if you're getting ready for retirement, ETS, any of that. There's a lot of nuances that come with need or wanting to buy a house if you're moving or staying in the same area. So I've got the mortgage mentor, Rebecca Richardson. She's out of Charlotte, North Carolina. She's got a background as military spouse and super well versed in VA loans. Yeah, could you just introduce a little bit of just your
Yes,
background and experience, Rebecca?
absolutely. Thanks for having me. So I became a lender when we were stationed at Fort Campbell. So I learned VA first, and I always say that that's kind of the basis that I got. And I was taught by a processor, so I was taught to pay attention to details from the very beginning. And VA remains one of my favorite loan types because it just gives a lot of opportunity and common sense. And it's nice to have that where there's some flexibility where we need it to help give veterans the benefits that they've worked so hard to earn.
Great. So can you help us understand a little bit, as I talk to people from any service as they're getting ready to transition out of the military, whether it be a typical transition or retirement, what are some considerations when it comes to timeline? How far out they should be starting this process? Because a lot of people, get, within a couple months of getting ready to get out, and they think that they're going to be able to buy a house, but they don't have a job yet. And
Right.
a lot of people can get kind of stuck in this tough area of like needing to move off base or needing to move, but they don't have the qualifications yet to actually qualify for a mortgage.
Right.
So yeah, can you
Right.
talk to us a little bit just about timeline? That sort
Yeah. So a big part of loan approval is called the ability to repay. And what that relates back to is then employment and income and the stability of that employment and income. And the reason that I mention that is because we're going all the way back to if we see on your LES that there's an ETS date of less than a year, and you're not planning on signing another contract and all of that, and that is a true ETS date, then what that does is that naturally puts us into kind of a limbo land, right? Because we don't, or a limbo status, because although we know that you will have the income for your active duty income for a while, that is ending. There is an end date for that. And we really need to know what's next. Sometimes that can be difficult because somebody maybe doesn't know what's next, or maybe they're entering, skill bridge, or maybe they are entering a civilian job, but don't necessarily have those details. So what that looks like as far as what we are looking for is what will they be doing, or what's going to be their primary source of income. If it's going to be retirement income, great. But again, we need the paperwork that aligns with that. If there's going to be a disability rating and some disability income, yes, that's absolutely income that can be counted. But again, we need the confirmation of what that is specifically, because we're going to have to be able to tie it back to official documentation that gives us that, that type of information. What factors in is if somebody is going for a civilian job, and that's really going to be the main or only income that we're counting, is what are going to be the details around that job? Does it relate back to the active duty job? There needs to be typically some kind of continuity, back to the MOS, or some sort of something that we can tie that together, saying, yes, while I was active duty, this is what I did. Now that I have a civilian job, this is what I did. And there's some thread tying those together. Outside of that, what we're then looking at is structurally, how are you paid? So if it's salary and you have an offer letter that's salary, and that start date is, within a reasonable time of closing, even if it's after closing, then that is okay. That's very straightforward because we know what the salary is going to be. Where things can get a little muddy is if it is going to be variable income, or if it's going to be, think something like bonus or commission, something that is not have a standard gross, before tax income amount, that it's tied to essentially kind of the work that you produce. The trouble that we run into there is that there hasn't been any history. There hasn't been enough history to meet the program guidelines, the rules of a VA loan, in order to meet that and show that you meet that ability to repay, that standard, or that stable income standard. And that's where, again, things can go a little bit off rails if it doesn't have that stability factor. So a lot of different scenarios. Also, obviously depends on what somebody wants to buy, what are the debts they have, all those things. So it can be done, but the earlier we start having those conversations can really help making sure that that exit plan is set up successfully, if, for the purpose of buying a home versus, you already have an accepted job, but maybe it has that variable component or something like that. It's a little bit more difficult to undo at that point. It's better to head into it with expectations of, kind of a choose your own adventure of the different pathways that you can take as you're exiting the military.
Okay, so time wise, would you say, so if somebody's a year out, is that too early, or is that a good time to start talking to, a loan officer like yourself to start
I don't think it's too early. I mean, honestly, I will sometimes have conversations with people a year and a half before they want to buy. Now, obviously there are a lot of variables that can change, before it's really kind of go time. But if it's just sort of a general, this is what I would like to do, walk me through what these steps look like, right? So it's certainly a lot higher level, but even sometimes that higher level knowledge can help direct some of those next steps, funneling down to more specific information that then can make it an easier path. At a minimum, I definitely recommend 6 months, where things can get very sideways very quickly is when, say, somebody's on their, terminal leave, and then it's, none of these details have fallen into place, but we want to buy a house, but we don't have the details, and it's go time, right? Like I've got somewhere I need to be in 45 days or whatever the case may be. So the earlier we start, there is no harm in at least having those conversations. Credit might not even need to be pulled. It really depends on how much of a planner, the client is, and how much details they want or how many pieces they want to put into place. But there's never any harm of just having the conversation and understand that framework of what we're heading towards.
Great. Okay. So starting, 6 months out would be ideal.
Sure. Yeah.
And, an ideal situation, if somebody has at least a couple months or a few months of terminal leave, can be a good buffer to use so that
Right.
they can get the signed offer letter from whatever employment that they're going to have and talk to a lender about that employment to see, okay,
Right.
is all this income able to be used?
Right.
How can we work this so that, they have a signed job offer letter? Maybe they're even starting their job at, terminal leave, or, you said that there is some time to start even after they, ETS retire or something like that.
Right. Because I mean, it's very much common sense to think, oh, okay, well, I'm making more money with a civilian job, or the earning potential is higher, or whatever. I mean, that's real money. But because it might not meet program guidelines, it's as if it wasn't there at all, which can be a really tough pill to swallow when it's crunch time. But if we can prepare for that, then sometimes that can help direct even sometimes those conversations maybe that they're having with a future or potential employer, and say, maybe it looks like, maybe it is kind of a base and bonus or base and commission structure, but maybe it's, for now, what I need is I actually need a higher base, maybe possibly at, the expense of not making as much commission or having a lower cap or something like that. But again, if the goal is purchasing a home, we need to figure out which those priorities, need to come first, and then work towards that and structure everything else around that.
Right. And I'm guessing you've seen this situation a few times, like what people should maybe aim to avoid is just having, they have their ETS or their retirement date, but they're not super concerned about a job. They, think they may get disability, but it's not finalized,
Right.
very soon. So they can't use that income. They don't have income from a job offer, letter or anything like that yet, but they do
Right.
need to move back home or something like that, or they need to move from off base or from on base to off base.
Mhm.
And those can be kind of the tough situations. So I guess if people are trying to
Right.
maybe
Because nothing's kind of, nothing's firmed up, nothing's specific. It's this is happening or this will happen. Well, until some of those have happened and we can document them, because obviously my world and mortgages are ruled by what we can document. So if we can't document it yet, that just might mean longer time. So what does that functionally look like if let's say that somebody, didn't have those answers 6 months out, or didn't have some of these questions or things like that? What that may look like might be a short-term rental. It might be living with family until we can get some of those things in place. Because that's always my concern about somebody not getting a correct and complete answer up front, and then potentially being in the position where they've had a financial outlay for inspections or appraisal, and the expectation that they're buying this home and all those kind of things. And it just simply can't be, not because we know you're going to make the money, but just because it can't fit within that box, then that would be a loan denial. Whereas if we start earlier and do a complete and proper setup of the file for pre-approval, then it results in a much, smoother process, a much more successful purchase.
Great. And maybe real quick, we can touch on the VA. So VA funding fee is something to consider as well. So as people are, if they can start their, any sort of disability claim early,
Right.
if they can get that set, how does that affect, this VA funding fee, that if somebody hasn't used a VA loan before, they might not be aware of this as well.
Sure.
Could you just kind of touch quickly on this VA funding fee, disability rating, and how that can really benefit somebody if they start that process early and get their rating, as soon as possible?
Right. So since a VA loan is 100% loan, obviously no down payment needed. Now there are closing costs, separate conversation.
Yep.
But the VA does have, depending on the type of service you did, and if you have owned a home before, and if you are putting a down payment, they have different rates of what is called the funding fee, which is essentially the VA's version of mortgage insurance. It does actually go to fund some other programs, but that's probably the easiest thing to kind of tie it to. So if you think of it kind of like mortgage insurance, but it's not something that's paid monthly. It's rolled back into the loan. So if you have been active duty and you meet the requirements to be eligible for the VA loan, and you have not had a VA loan before, then the funding fee is 2.15%. And so what that looks like is that is, if the sales price was $100,000, you have $2,150 being rolled back into the loan. Okay. So if you have a disability rating of 10% or higher, then that funding fee does get waived, and it does get waived for any subsequent use of your VA benefits, for future homes. It's not just for, first time use and things like that. And ultimately what we're going back to is, yes, confirmation of any kind of disability rating, but really what that does is it shows up on your certificate of eligibility that we pull directly from the VA that says, yes, you can get a VA loan, and you are or are not exempt from the funding fee. So that's really what rules our world, is what gets translated over to that certificate of eligibility that essentially tells us as the lender, here's how you need to structure this loan.
Got it. Well, great. Yeah, I think that was great information. If people have questions or they want, obviously a lot of this is gray area and specific to the individual or the family,
Right.
their timeline and their situation. So people could find you on veteranpcs.com under North Carolina. But you're licensed in how many states?
I'm licensed in over 25. So rather than bore you with rattling them all off, right. All my contact information is on the website. You can find me pretty much on all socials also as the Mortgage Mentor. And regardless of if I'm licensed in your state or not, I'm happy to answer any, VA questions and get you connected up with another VA specialist.
Great. Well, thanks again, for coming on and just answering some of these questions. I know the transition, retirement, it can be a very stressful process. And especially if people don't know that there are some nuances with buying a house during that time. Hopefully this video is helpful. And then if people have additional questions, they can reach out to you.
Anytime. Thanks.
Thanks, Rebecca.